In this video, we're going to talk about accessing, adding, and updating properties of an object. Let's create our test person object right here. Const person is going to be equal to an object that for now is simply going to have a first name set to, for example, Brad. To access, add, or update a property of an object, we can use something called a dot notation. Dot notation allows us to retrieve some values from an object. For example, if we only want to get the first name of our person, we can do this. Console log, and now person dot first name. By using this dot notation, we can access this specific property of this specific object. Now, if I save that, you can see we only get a string of Brad. That's it. In the same fashion, we can also add or overwrite some properties. For example, if we do something like this, person.dog is going to be equal to an object, and that object is going to have a name of Fluffy and an age of 2. Just like that. Now, if we save this, you can see we're just getting Brad, but now let's go back to console logging the entire object, and you should be able to see that our dog property was added to our person alongside first name. Let me expand the console just a bit so that you can see that we have first name and we also have dog right there. You could also do something like this, person.age is equal to 25, for example. Save that. Now you can see that we have first name, dog, and age. Let's say that you wanted to access only the name of the dog. In that case, you would do person.dog.name, and that's going to give us only Fluffy, as you can see. So you can use that object notation whenever you have an object, and you can just keep diving deeper and deeper with the dot notation to access a specific property. There is also a second way to retrieve properties from an object. It is called square bracket notation. Square bracket notation, like the dot notation, also allows us to access properties of an object. So we can do console log, and then in there we can specify the name of our object, and now, as the name suggests, we can use the square brackets to access a certain property. Let's say that we want to access the first name. In here, you have to specify the string of the name of that first specific thing, in our case, first name. Now, that's equivalent to just doing this, person.firstname. That's it. If you take a look, we get the same output by using these two different ways of writing syntax. Well, square bracket notation has some additional features. For example, we can access properties dynamically. Let me show you what I mean. For example, let's say that you don't know yet what property they want to access. Let's say that a user on the screen chooses a toggle and then picks a certain property he wants, and then you get that value. We can emulate that by creating a variable called property, and then we're going to set it to something. In this case, we set it ourselves, but imagine that this property is going to dynamically come to you. Now we have this property age set in a specific variable. What you can do now is you can simply say person and then specify the property you want to get, like this. Of course, let's add the age there. And now if you take a look, if we save it, we get 25. Whereas if you had the same thing above, if you had this property here, and then you try to using the dot notation for person.property, that's not going to work. As you can see, you get undefined. Why is that? Well, that is because it's not taking this property as it is, just as age. It's taking the property literally. So what it's doing, it is looking for a property key right there. You can see if I add a property here, it's going to be test now. You can see we get it in the console. So it cannot dynamically search for some properties. It can only get it literally. On the other hand, with square bracket notation, it's going to interpret it, actually get the value of that string, and then search for that. As you can see, we get 25. It is also used when you have key names that are not usual JavaScript variable names. For example, you're completely allowed to wrap the keys in a string. This is not going to change the output. You can see if I do this, it looks exactly the same. People usually don't do that for single word names because there's no reason to. You can simply do it like this. But if you had a name that contains multiple words, which is usually not a good practice, then you would need to do something like this. This is a key with dashes. As you can see, this is not a valid variable name, but if we wrap it into a string, then it becomes a valid variable name and we can assign it a value. In the same way, you now cannot access this string using a dot notation because it's going to be invalid syntax. Where on the other hand, what you can do is go in here and just specify it as a string, and now you can actually get that value. Also, if we don't have the dashes, we can also have just the spaces. This is a key with spaces. Same thing happens. If you try doing that with dot notation, it's simply not a valid syntax. Whereas in the second way, we have the string here, so we can put that there and get the value. Don't worry about this. This is not a good practice and is not used a lot. The only thing you have to know is that you can access properties of an object using the dot notation and also the square bracket notation. Whenever you have simple properties and you don't have to dynamically search for them, and that's going to be in 80 to 90% of the cases, just use the simple, straightforward dot notation. But whenever you have to access a property like this dynamically, then you can use the square brackets notation, because with this we can actually interpret variables and get what the value is behind them and then search for that value. That was it for accessing, adding, and updating properties of an object. In the next video, we're going to learn how you can add not only properties to your objects, but how you can create your own methods and then assign them to your objects. Stay tuned.